Everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Debt Nation, where we are busy putting death out of business. We got Penny Wong coming in. Are you in Singapore, right?
No, I'm in Sydney.
Oh, you're on Sydney. You're back.
I was in Singapore last year and the year before, but I think I'm stuck here now.
Globetrotter, absolutely. We endorse that. Well, we've got Penny Wong coming in from Sydney, Australian episode here. Before we cross over, let's quickly thank our sponsors for this episode. That's Thrivous, free nootropics and geoprotectors. You know the deal. $5 all the way up to $160 worth of free Thrivous. The rules are in the description. Also, thanks to David Kelly, I Am Transhuman, for sponsoring this episode. Fantastic work. Thanks, Dave. And new posts coming out on that page all the time. Penny, how are you? Good to see you. Finally, we get to do a show. I'm really excited about this.
Likewise. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
No, thank you. Yeah, well, let's tell people, who are you? What do you do? What's your type of story? You know, you've got a very cool story going on there. Sum up to people. Tell people what you want to know about your story.
In order to put the setting right to begin with, this is what happens when your parents, or my dad in particular, put me in front of Star Trek since I was 3 years old.
Oh.
So this is why. This is what happens. So I believe in the whole, Trekonomics of what an ecosystem looks like, that whole utopian view of, let's remove the concept of scarcity, automate the concept of abundance. So I've been born into that thinking with a vision of what a future could look like. Raised by science fiction. I thank my dad for that. And, with gratitude, my mum's, in terms of ethics and morals and, do good to other people. So that's kind of set my foundations and the choices I've made throughout life, the people that I've met, and my journey. So I've been following the robots, I guess.
Follow the robots. It's kind of like follow the yellow brick road, follow the robots. Who is your favorite Star Trek character?
Data, of course.
Data?
Data, yes.
I have to agree with you there. I think, I like Data a lot. I think he's kind of cool. Spock, I like Spock, and Captain Kirk as well. He's pretty cool. Some of the big ones.
And the Doctor, the holodeck Doctor.
They're also good, aren't they?
Yeah.
I've just been watching a lot of Star Trek while in self-isolation, so it's been a lot of fun. A lot of the older episodes, anything I can find on Netflix. But there was a period of time there that I had this device on my TV at my parents' house, and it would just record every episode of a single thing back in the day. And so I just set it to record every episode of Star Trek that came on TV. And it happened to be in one of those times when it was a new TV station and they just played cheap things. And so it was just like every episode of Star Trek every day. So I got to watch tens and tens of episodes of Star Trek from the very beginning. It was a good experience. It really opens your mind up to the possibilities of the universe, and how we could potentially just be a player in a series of players, and it will be very exciting.
Yeah.
And one tool we can use to assist. Maybe it's not a tool. This is the language we're going to play with here today on the show. Robots. Let's talk robots. So before we talk robots, I have to ask you, favorite science fiction author?
Oh, Kubrick, probably.
Kubrick? Why?
Everything in the movie. Everyone sampled from there, in terms of, how way ahead of his time. Amazing visionary. He's able to put, that thought into a movie that everyone can relate to. There's so many samples that have spawned out of his movies, Space Odyssey, the concept of HAL as well. Where do I begin?
Let's well, what do you think of Space Odyssey? It's a fascinating movie. It's left up to interpretation about what happens. What do you take away? What's your I'll tell you my version, you tell me your version, but what's your version of a Space Odyssey? What actually happens in there? What do you think happens?
What happens?
Yeah,
Um,
what's your interpretation of Space Odyssey?
Interesting. At first, it was really, really strange. Like when I watched it in the 80s, I just thought this is an interesting movie, and I never understood it. Um, and I've watched it again and again and again. Um, and I guess everyone's got different interpretations of what they draw out of it. There's a little bit of a dark side to it where the machine decides, well, in order to save everyone, I need to sorry, human, you've got to go. That's what could go wrong potentially. And it's quite sad. Like, Hal decides that he's that smart, and he's doing what he thinks is right. And locks David out. Now, interestingly, there's a link between that part of that movie to Star Trek Discovery, where, and I draw that attention specifically to solve a particular problem. So in Star Trek Discovery, the captain, or the captain that was locked in the bridge, was locked in a containment, and the spaceship had fallen apart, but there was a gap between her containment and the other part of the spaceship. But the gap had no air, so she could die if she was released from that containment. So she was able to actually argue and put her point forward with the AI, where in 2001 it was just Hal. That's it. You can't argue with Hal. Hal's decided what to do. But in Star Trek Discovery, she was able to argue with the spaceship that, well, if you lock me in this container, I'm going to die. But if you unlock the container so I can run to the other side, I may die. However, I may be able to, I have a likely chance of surviving and save the ship. So that debate and that logic was improved upon 2001 Space Odyssey.
I love this. I love this idea that you're playing with these two ideas. I mean, my favorite, going back for a second, my favorite science fiction author has got to be Isaac Asimov.
Yes.
And he wrote something which kind of plays into what you're talking about here, which is iRobot, which is a sort of the same idea with this centralized supercomputer that said, well, for the many to survive, we have to sacrifice the few. And, and the few, in this case, was the rights and liberties of humans. It was some of the population of humans. It was an attempt at suppressing humans for the betterment of themselves, for their own. And these three characters, the Star Trek Discovery, Hal, and iRobot, all the same sort of thing. I mean, it is the big philosophical debate. Where do we go from here? And this is why you're so important, because we want to direct. I don't know. Again, language that I'll have to get you to tease out for me. We have to sort of manipulate the events so that we can have a positive future with robots and humans interacting together. Where does that begin? Where does that journey begin? Where does that even start? It starts with science fiction. It starts with thought. It starts with theory, right? But what else do we have? Like, where does it begin?
I think we should, this is my opinion, we need to draw on our humanity. Why do we exist? Well, first of all, you need to look at, well, we are on this earth for a finite amount of time. What are we doing on this earth, and what do we as individuals want to achieve before we leave this earth? It's based on values on humans, don't kill each other, treat each other with respect. There's values amongst religions, amongst different cultures, amongst individuals. How do we embody all that into this artificial intelligence? I had a conversation with my business partner, who's an AI engineer, many years ago, and he's a brilliant engineer, and we had a debate, a very, very long debate. He said, I just want to create this thing, it'll learn on its own, it'll evolve. And I said, whoa, hang on. As technologists, we have an obligation to society not to create something that would harm us. If I look at the world today, the police exist because there are bad actors. If we create this artificial intelligence to do its own thing with no guidance, we're going to get really bad AI, like really bad humans. Same thing. We're just replicating what hasn't quite worked amongst humans into this AI or this robot. So the way I would look at it is, how do we incorporate values as humans into these beings? And as Adam's 3 laws, for instance, right? Don't harm humans and so forth. If this robot or this AI lives in a particular jurisdiction like Australia or Singapore or China, doesn't matter where it is, it needs to respect the customs, the laws of that particular domain or geography. So I start with that basis of, as a citizen of a country, I'm a citizen of Asgardia as well, what laws do we have to respect? And we have to respect how that country or nation governs itself. So how do we build those values, society's values, into this digital assistant? How do we build human values into the digital assistant? And how do we also get diversity across how it's built? You don't leave it up to engineers to design this thing. They're going to think one way. We need creatives, we need psychologists, we need, God forbid me, people, financiers as well, and lawyers. We need diversity across different types of religions, age groups, sexes, to create what this looks like to represent humanity in general.
When there's a natural disaster or some sort of disaster, you have the government reacts, and they react on a local level, a state level, a federal level, or they can have something called a whole of government approach. What you're saying is we need a whole of humanity approach to this. We need every person that we can to have put their input into the data set in order to derive some sort of meaningful value out of the data set, because without that, you're not going to have a true data set, and you're not going to have all of the implications of that data set, and therefore you're going to get wacky outputs. You need good inputs to have good outputs. I like this as well, and I don't want to be a nerd here, but a lot of people think that as Asimov stopped at the 3 laws of robotics. Actually, there was a 4th law. There was the Zeroth law, and that's a robot may not harm humanity, or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. And that's the 4th law. I don't know. It was a very controversial one because then he played with that in his later stories. Around the books about the mule and how the it's very interesting. I don't want to spoil it unless you want me to spoil it. I've done it on earlier shows, but it's very, very interesting how he comes to play with that idea and how it causes some problems for the actual existence of humanity. But it's very interesting. So like you're saying, we need a whole of humanity approach. We need different creative types, different types of people across different industries, different governmental, citizenry types, every type we can get in order to get a good data input, so that we can start to assume and creatively compose where this AI might go or where these robots might go. A lot of people have seen different movies, different Hollywood tropes. For example, a very famous one, AI, about a small boy. Have you seen AI?
I have seen AI.
What did you think about AI with the small boy? He comes into the family's home. He's a robot, but they get a biological son, and then the little robot boy starts to feel disenfranchised as he gets left behind. What do you? I mean, there is moral consequences in there. What do you think about AI, that movie?
It was a little heartbreaking. The little boy who thought he was a boy, then realized he wasn't a boy. Then he got left out of society. That could be real. I mean, if I look at Data from Star Trek, going back to Data from Star Trek, he was going through the same thing. What is a man? Who am I? And in some respects, us humans are trying to work that out ourselves as well. Who are we? We're this corporeal being of energy.
It's so interesting that you keep coming back to this philosophical point of who are we, and I think this is really important, and we need to grapple with this question ASAP of who are we and where do we want to go, because we're starting to launch rockets off into space. There's a space race happening. Elon Musk is doing stuff. He's incredibly anxious to die on Mars. Good on him. So I endorse that. But there's this race, and if we don't know who we are, then any life that we give to birth to here on in, who are they? And we should have a better fundamental knowledge of who we are. Another great trope, another great movie would be a Bicentennial Man, where it reaches into the core of this question of who are we, or who are they, or what's going on. And this is a robot who lives almost an ageless life. And he across different generations of a family, and decides he wants to become a man. And what do you think about that? It also reaches into the same depth of this question.
It does. So this is where the transhuman thing comes in. I'm aiming to live to 150 at the very least. So I play a hand in developing a AI/android that will turn around to me and say, "Hey, Penny, stop telling me what to do." So I'll be both disturbed and amused at the same time, and happy actually to leave this earth. I have this, I don't know, I guess dream as a child. It may or may not ever come to fruition, of developing this AI robot android, and teach it as much as we can, and bring people into the mix as well. Raise a child. It takes a village to raise a child. It's going to take the whole world to raise this. What this AI digital assistant / robot's going to look like. So for me, everything's a little bit interconnected. Yeah.
All right, so you're there in the development world. You know a lot about the development of these new robots. You go to AI festivals or robot festivals or technology festivals, and you would see at the technology festivals lots of different companies doing lots of different things. Not all necessarily building robots, but some building chips, some building arms and components, some building other things, some building software. Specialized things, and some trying to go over the full route, of building a robot. But what do you see? Do you see robots continuing down this path of being built in a decentralized way, or do you see more central entities gobbling up more and more control? For example, some big provider like Microsoft or Dell or Sony or some of these big tech giants assuming more and more responsibility for entities that are more powerful, like Sophia the robot.
Yes, absolutely. So there's the big six, big sevens. You've got your Googles, you've got Amazons, you have, Tencent, all those companies throwing a lot of money and funding, Boston Dynamics, building their own thing. Then on the flip side, you have Sophia the robot and her AI brand that's been developed, which is an AI marketplace on the blockchain, just that Singularity Net. They exist to try and democratize, use this term loosely, and create an artificial intelligence marketplace. So researchers who would never commercialize their algorithms can come on this platform and share, their design, their thinking, their ingenuity to someone across the other side of the world. So it can help solve real world problems to states, sectors, people that may not have access because they may not have money, or what we call money today. So what this AI marketplace, Singularity Net, off the back of Sophia the robot, the intention is good because the founders' intentions are good as well. Ben's, helping people in Africa to become developers, and there's a lot of bits and pieces linked up to the back of that as well with good intentions. So I support that project because of how it was born and what the intent is to build something like that out. So it's not meant to be owned by one person or one entity. It started off with the typical ICO, you get the cap raise, you get people involved in this vision. You've got the team working on the platform. And in the future, I see it becoming its own decentralized autonomous organization. It should be owned by one person. It should be owned by everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, Ben Goertzel is a funny cat. I mean, think about him what you want, but he's a genius. He's incredibly smart, and he knows a lot about the negative implications. And I think that's why he's a lot more than any of us, about the negative implications of runaway bad AI. And I think the more I look at solutions to democratization, as you call it, or the loose definition of democratization, it comes down to open source. It really does. People checking and rechecking and collaborating between the networks, and and that's the way you can get this whole of humanity approach. Again, I guess the problem is the intelligence gap. Not everybody can participate in that. But again, that's where the outreach needs to occur. And I think this is where governments are falling behind. This is where NGOs and organizations and intergovernmental organizations such as the United Nations, I think there's a whole big laggard here of these good intentioned organizations and structures like Singularity Net and Singularity University and some of maybe some of the softer sides of some of these big corporations. They're sort of racing ahead at a quickening pace, and yet humanity is not talking about these issues. That when you watch TV or if you read the newspaper, we're still talking about a lot of very old talking points to do with the economy, to do with health, to do with housing markets, and all very important stuff. But the robot world is left to behind paywalls, behind The Economist or behind, and it's in the mid pages or the back pages of The Economist, and that's where people really have deep philosophical debates. Whereas it should be on the front page of the Telegraph or the Daily Mail or something like that. Maybe not a big story, but get in contact with XYZ organization to have your input in, because there's a gap there. Not everybody knows knows programming, or not everybody has access to technology festivals or whatever, but they should have access to an intermediary in a more pronounced way to have their input into some of these open source projects. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I follow projects like the Venus Project as well in Florida. They're looking at innovation in governance and how we govern society. That's been going for a while. Blue Frontiers was another one that looked at creating new economic sea zones, floating cities on atolls. And if the society doesn't like each other, they can just separate the island. Asgardia, which looks at, or they have formed a government in preparation of going to space. So I believe that there's 190, I think, nation states. There's 180 currencies that are recognized, and the whole birth of Bitcoin, and then off the back of it, decentralized ledger technologies and blockchain can fundamentally change that. We should be looking at a resource-based economy and governance system. There is enough to ensure everyone gets fed. There is enough to ensure that everyone has a roof over their head, that they have access to energy. If we think and unlock our mindset from scarcity, and it should be of abundance. There is enough for everyone. So I strongly believe in that, which is why I support a lot of these projects. But I'm also a huge supporter of bringing government and industry together. Yep. If we're not on the same page, understanding what the hell this is, there's no way we're going to make change. So you've got one side that's going to be threatened, another side that's, advocates and a little bit of anarchy. But how do we bring everyone to one page so we're talking about the same thing, and we're looking at, changing everything together? It's not the point left, point right scenario.
I'm Team Wong. I'm going Team Wong. I'm going long Team Wong on this one. This is really. Yeah, this is really good. And, it's so interesting. Actually, we've had members of Asgardia on here. I've written to the UN to try and get, there was an interesting program I saw on Turkish news about the sea cities, and we've had sea city talks on this one, but I'm trying to get a UN representative to come on for that one. And the other one you mentioned, Jacques Fresco's Zeitgeist movement. They're very interesting. He was someone who, his story is incredibly interesting for people who are living right now through this market crash, because he was inspired from, the 30s, the Depression. He was there. He lived that, and he saw capital sitting around, factories just sitting there, all the capital unused. And he's saying, how the heck can you have all these these machines sitting there and workers just standing around outside? How is there this mismatch in resources? And you're right. We advocate for Project 222 here, Charles Holsopple, for food, shelter, and water as a bare minimum for everyone on the planet. Yeah, because we already, and the propaganda is in the Economist, or in some of these harder edge neo liberal economic forums, the argument is there's not enough resources to go around, and that there's some sort of we're not in some sort of post-capitalist world, and it's not true. There's more, there's definitely more resources. It's just the misallocation of resources. During the financial crisis, the last one in 2008, people are evicted onto the street. You're homeless, but yet the home stays empty. It still sits there, and it just sits there empty. And that's a misallocation or a kink that's gone wrong in the system somewhere, where you've got people on the street but an empty house sitting there. There's something wrong there. It's not because the resources aren't there. It's because there's something wrong in the system. But that's only an example to play out to the whole world. We produce more food than we can eat, and yet there's a misallocation there. People go starving, and all this food goes to waste. How do we fix the kinks in that system? A lot of it comes down to AI. Then you talk to a politician, and they say, "What the hell's AI?" And then it goes, "Oh, here we go again," which is why industry and government has to talk to each other. I'm totally going long on Team Wong. It's interesting. What's the difference? Let's talk about boring robots. So, there's we do live in this sort of emerging post-capitalist system, and boring robots are part of that. Boring robots being manufacturing. So, people in the old days, they used to go onto a production line and they would be a robot, do something, do a task. This old 100-year-old Henry Ford model of production. Now a robot does it. Yeah. Let's talk about emerging robots on the manufacturing line.
Henry Ford, you touch on Henry Ford. So you know that Henry Ford coined the term the weekend?
Yeah, I guess so.
He did. So people were working 6-7 days, and when he developed the automobile, or he improved that production line, he gave his staff 2 days off, so they can actually use the cars, drive around, and so forth. And people, there's that, network effect of people wanting to buy cars and taking their families out on the weekend. With the rise of, I say elements of artificial intelligence, because AI doesn't exist yet in its true form, and we're just working on slithers of it. The more we utilize and leverage technology to automate the low-level tasks, low-level stuff that we shouldn't be doing, as humans, there's better things to spend your time on, the more time it'll free us up to do higher value work. So if Henry Ford was able to trigger the effect of getting people to have 2 days off of a 7-day week, leveraging artificial intelligence and automation, why can't we have a 3-day week and still have similar output and productivity? So this is the paradigm shift. I'm hoping out of this crisis, because things change in crisis, it's opening the minds of people, of governments, to kind of not fear the use or the rise. I wouldn't say rise. I don't want to put everyone into a little bit of a state of fear. The emergence of androids, coming up, robotics, artificial intelligence, all these new technologies. to help us humans. So that my focus is about how do we leverage technology to help humans, help humanity. So we're not focused on that lower level task. We're spending, way too much amount of time on computers. We're not there to, type away and do things over and over again. It's madness. It's absolute madness. If we automate those low level tasks, then it'll free us up to help the elderly, to, have one-on-one coffees with people, to spend more time with other humans and away from, systems and the system. So I'm huge advocate for freeing people away from those low level tasks. I would say that's even modern day slavery.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I used the example of a production line on purpose because I wanted to see if you were going to play with it. But in the modern economy, the production line is existing. I mean, that's what that's what houses are. That's the new modern consumption-based economy. And so the robots are now shifting from taking our jobs on the production factory, and they're coming into our homes. The Roomba. The Roomba is a classic robot. It's fun. It does your floor. It cleans sweeps your floor or whatever it does. I don't know. But so can you talk more about this emerging technology that's coming into our homes where the washing machine, the Roomba, the dryer, the dishwasher, these technologies are emerging. Those are old technology, but these new emerging technologies are coming into our homes and alleviating some of the functions, the household functions of people in our own homes and in our modern economies.
Yeah. So it starts from robots to help you with day-to-day things. Yeah, it's nice to have. Is it a necessity? No. As a lazy human, I've got both Alexa and Google integrated into, turn Netflix on, turn Netflix off, turn lights on, turn all the little things. Nice to haves. But then when you look at the elderly, my grandma's 95. I'm working on a system where hopefully I'll be able to help more people moving forward. If you're 95, you're less mobile, you may be home alone, you may be stuck in the bathroom. If you fall over, you can't get to a phone. What can you do? A lot of people, unfortunately, pass away home alone when in their elderly age. If you had a digital assistant in the home looking after them, IoT sensors go off, humans gone into the bathroom, 15 minutes later, oh, that's not quite normal human behavior. I'm going to see if the human's okay, look at, the sensors to see if there's any movement. Second, call out to the human, are you okay? Are you okay, Grandma? Grandma doesn't answer. Immediately SMS the list of carers. Failing that, immediately SMS emergency services. So I see the role of artificial intelligence, digital, all these technologies, the convergence of technologies, including having a potentially robot in the home to serve humans. First of all, to ensure that they're safe. I look at everyone locked in their homes now in this era, COVID era, and it's like how many people are actually home alone? So I'm dreading to think about, the elderly that are actually in their homes in apartment buildings who are, have no human contact. I'm not saying replace humans, absolutely not. As the population ages, we don't have enough carers to care for the elderly. So we have a need now to depend on something else to help. Japan's experienced this.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to go there with the elderly thing. Is Japan?
Yeah.
Continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So they've had to do it out of necessity, and more and more countries have had to do it necessity. So don't waste a good crisis, right? I hope this opens the eyes of many people, many governments, many people who are change makers to now see technology as a way to help us. Help those who are vulnerable, help those who we cannot reach out to in situations like this in particular. I'm working on robots now that, as a part of a partnership group that scans 200 temperatures in 1 minute. So, that company, Ubitech, had repurposed all their robots to serve in this era as well. So we're working with them to try and get it out there in market. And that's one non-threatening example where, look, you can have a nurse scanning, you can have 6 to 12 nurses, or you can have a robot working and scanning people's temperatures while the nurses work on higher value work, talking to people. So, I've heard stories where the nurses were crying in happiness because their workload has just been relieved, and they're able to help more people. So how do we, use and leverage robotics to automate and help with the low level tasks to augment our capability? And all we have to offer is our time, and we exchange, most of us, our time for money. So it's in our best interest to see if we can leverage as many technologies as possible to raise our value back in society, so we can earn or maintain the earning of this concept of money. So it's everything is in this chain reaction, and if you don't augment or improve your skills and capabilities, then you're not going to compete on the global scale and so forth. So then the question is, how do we lift everyone up together at the same time? And it is, if you can have this AI, it doesn't exist yet, that looks at a resource-based way of distributing resources, similar to what the Venus Project has done. Even these masks, PPE equipment traveling all around the world, if we had a system that coordinated globally, we could get the right materials, the right, medical supplies to the right areas based on needs. At the moment, it's chaos. Like, I'm helping out for a not-for-profit at the moment who's bringing masks and test kits into the country at no margin, because his other business in renewable energy has done really well, and he's just doing this for social impact. So you know what, I'm here to support you, whatever I can do. But then as I'm hearing about the clutter of everything else around the world, the news, US hijacked or pirate a whole plane full of PPE equipment, like, what the hell's going on here? The supplies aren't getting to the right areas based on needs. It's based on who can hustle the most. I'm like, whoa, there's something completely wrong about this whole scenario. There's a global emergency. There is a better way to coordinate all this. If, this is a bit too early, if, companies such as Singularity Net and their AI marketplace were a little bit more advanced, and people were, actually contributing to that and linking into that, the whole pandemic's come too early. That will be the best way to facilitate how do we coordinate global supply chains in a fair and transparent manner, based on needs, not based on, oh, I know someone, high up, so I'm going to get first priority for my, I don't know, nation or segment or whomever. So yeah, that's something to think about.
Yeah. You've mentioned a lot of really great points there, and I love this notion of assisting the elderly in their homes, looking out for their welfare and their security, and potentially providing them with some sort of a conversational comfort as well. A lot of elderly people enjoy playing board games and things with the computer, if people aren't available. So that's good. Exercise their mind and do all that sort of stuff as well. That's really good. But yes, on this broader based notion of global supply chains. That's the other thing. But on this broader-based issue of global supply chains, there's definitely a misallocation. I mean, once you get the government involved with allocation, it's by default, they're a blunt instrument. They always misallocate, and it does become a global hustle. And then it's up to corporations to try and chase profit incentives or social standards, social incentives. Elon Musk invests a lot of money into PR, for example, trying to improve his image to the public. Something like that. Richard Branson does the same. They both do great projects as well. Mm-hmm. But there is huge inefficiencies there when it comes to needs based, mm-hmm. and where those resources are in the system. There's huge misallocations. And when it comes to something like a global pandemic, I remember World War One, World War Two. I don't know, but there was periods of time there when adversaries would stop fighting each other and turn on a common enemy. I think there was one famous battle, where they were fighting each other. I don't know who it was, Russians and Germans or somebody, and a pack of wolves came in, and they were tearing the town apart and tearing everyone apart. And the two sides drew up a quick armistice, and they joined forces. They attacked the wolves, and this is kind of what's happening, in the global scene. You're seeing a global ceasefire happening. The United Nations calls for a global ceasefire. You've seen some of that. You've seen America helping North Korea turn against a global enemy. But the point is that there's not enough information and data, because there's not enough intelligence, i.e., there's not enough robot assistance to coordinate an effective campaign. And what I was going to mention, I just remembered it. I've been rambling until I remembered it. But what you said about the nurses, that's right. That's really good. This is what people have to understand. If a nurse is standing there and taking someone's temperature, that is a production line. It doesn't matter if there's social distancing or not. That is a low value production line. And humans are far more intelligent and far more capable of doing higher productive things than stand in a line and do come forward, do a test, put themselves in harm's way as a first responder, someone who actually society values and needs. And that's why, I'm looking at jobs in New York. You can get paid almost up to $400 an hour to be a first responder at this point of time. There's jobs going for $400 an hour or more in New York right now, for example. But that's a premium that society values this people. That's called value. But yeah, if they're standing in line, putting themselves in harm's way of getting this COVID thing, well, that's terrible. That's bad, and we don't want that. If you could get an AI to do 200 tests and say, you, that's much better. And again, that would alleviate the first responder, save that person, take them out of harm's way, use them on higher productive focus and energy. And it's just much more efficient overall. I mean, it's fantastic, but you got to play that out onto the big stage. Which is why you went there, which is great. But the other thing on the big stage is you need real time data, and this is the big issue. How do you get real time data into a network mainframe, into a database, in order to say, all right, computer, here's where all the resources are. Here's where all the masks are globally. Here's where they're concentrated. Here's where the hotspots are. How do we, using different tools and systems, effectively distribute them so that you can maximize health outcomes? It's such a good point.
It's interesting. We've worked on a micro scale, not macros and globally, but my business partner worked for Department of Health for like 15 years, and he was actually working with the nurses. The nurses loved him. He was pushing systems out in 24 hours. He built 50 systems in 3 years, which I think is amazing. And he was coordinating nurse recruitment, calculation of beds, tracking and administering, medications that are high risk of addiction. And they all fed into the minister's office. So at the end of the day, what we worked out is all they care about is reports. It's just at the end of the day, then all the nurses care about is, I don't care about system. I care about the data, and the report that I get out of it has to be accurate, because that has to be fed up the tree so they can make decisions based on that. So we worked out, well, hang on. Ultimately, it's about reporting the right data. How do you get data real time? How do you get the quality of the data as well? How do you ensure that the data has been vetted in the right manner, and so forth? So at the end of the day, it's just about data. The AI actually is only as good as the data you put into it.
Yeah.
No AI, no data. Crap AI, crap data, crap AI. It's quite simple. So then it's putting strategies in place on how you get the data to a point where it is valuable for people to make decisions upon and to be able to predict. And there's different strategies to do that. A couple of things could be, if the data is incorrect, try and clean it as close to the source as possible. I've worked in both enterprise and government, rescuing and failing and salvaging and failing digital projects, to know that a lot of it's actually got to do with the humans. It's not the data, it's not the systems, it's the people. How do you put the right nudges in place to get people to put information in, data in? How do you get them to validate it? How do you make sure that it flows through into the right path? If we crowdsource this thing, that's how it should be, with checks and balances in place.
It's classic Picard versus Data in Star Trek. Data's always saying, well, or even Mr. Spock. Mr. Spock is always saying, well, this is the logical thing to do, and you always do what logic dictates. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes his logic would take you down a path that's not exactly the best and the most optimal, even though it's logical. And that's why Picard says, no, I just went on my feeling. I just went on a human instinct. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Or Mr. Data, he says, well, according to the data, we don't have enough to, go through that adventure and come out on the other side with enough resources. It's statistically impossible. And yet then the adventure unfolds from those three vying points. And it's kind of where we are at this point, because back in Star Trek days in the 60s, when this stuff was still science fiction, Turing had only invented the computer in the 40s, but people could see its potential, and everybody at Bletchley Park, of course, not just Alan Turing, but everyone can see its potential. The computers were still slow and it was still science fiction. But we are at the point now with the global internet, with supercomputers, with the great computers there in the United States or in China, where there's a supercomputer race happening now. We're at the point where we can talk about this stuff with confidence, and actually, and even people in their own homes. This stupid thing here, this thing is so powerful, I don't even know what to do with it. But we're at that point where we can have these conversations, and they're not just like, oh yeah, in 30, 40 years. So let's talk about that. Where is robots in the future? How long until we get those guys behind you?
Depends at what capacity and what level of intelligence. These guys, people are building them already, but they are still very basic. Pick up things. Boston Dynamics, I think, is probably the most advanced in that space. There's different types of robots. There's ones that we want to look like us, like Sophia. There's other robots that are army, go and move equipment, do things, process. Other robots, help us in our day-to-day work. There's different types of robots in that sense. So it's very broad. Like, what type of robots do we want? Ones that understand us humans and trying to actually be our companion, others that are going to work in dangerous situations on our behalf, the ones that are going to help us in our day-to-day lives at home. The basic ones already exist. Like you said, the Roomba, the Gopher, like, Alexa and Google Assistant, that just does little things, one by one, little things based on the skills that we build around them. Sophia's brain is still being built, as more people provide input to that. But reaching that artificial general intelligence, I think we're probably about 30 years away, at least. Again, it depends on how much effort people put into it collaboratively. And hopefully not one nation state controls it. So we all have input into it.
Yeah, and this is, we're bumping up and down against the limits of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. This is a document that is getting outdated, and it needs to be updated or rejigged to be informed with what you're talking about. But just before I segue there, it's interesting that you're talking about a plethora, a diversity of robots, and it kind of reminds me of George Lucas. In Star Wars, because I think Obi-Wan, he goes to the diner, Dexter's diner, and they're talking about the clone people on Camino there, and Obi-Wan says that great line. Well, if robots could think, there'd be none of us here, would there? So are you all the biological wars that are happening. If you actually look at Star Wars, it's biology that's using robots to fight. The Trade Federation uses the robots army to fight, and there's a huge diversity of robots in the Star Wars world, but somehow. And if you're a Star Wars nerd, you know there's a bunch of treaties and galactic organizations and all this sorts of stuff that keep the robots subservient to biology. This is not the same vision, and that's a very standard rule that goes through Star Wars. They don't really rise up. It's very different to Isaac Asimov, who always struggling with the robots rising up against the people. They always have insurrections and they always do stuff. And it's different again to some of these other science fiction authors. You mentioned the Space Odyssey author who envisioned a very different sort
Black
of
Mirror style.
yeah, and that's a very human way to put it. And it was assisted by this sort of godlike, intelligent alien creature that built the monolith, and they went. So it's very interesting that you're talking about a diversity of robots, because I would have to agree. I think robots are going to come and look in funny ways all across the domestic purposes, manufacturing purposes in space, purposes with health, purposes with military, purpose with exploration. You can go right up to Nick Bostrom's one that goes out into the universe forever, self-replicating thing. And then you go down to the nanoscale robots as well, which will assist with human health, whether that be nanobots or something larger, like we're getting these digestible robots today that do rudimentary health checks or something like that. So robots are very diverse, and you do need a new set of organizations. But let's go back to that other point. You can build on any of that if you want, but the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, we're bumping up and down on the ceiling of that. It's becoming redundant. Do you think so?
I do. A lot of laws, a lot of treaties were built off what's happened yesterday.
Yeah.
And as changes, as we bring on new technologies, as we make new discoveries, these laws are becoming more and more outdated. So I'm all for, let's review everything. Every single country, review your laws, review your legal systems, review all these treaties. A lot of it doesn't make sense in today's modern world. So there's going to be lots of jobs, actually. As we come into this era, there's going to be unions for robots, robot rights. I'll probably lead that one. There's going to be, robot psychologists. How do we embed these things into our lives? What is right? What is wrong? How, if you're half human, half robot in whomever's, perception, are you still human? It's kind of bordering on that. What is human rights? What is a human? If 70% of my body has been replaced by all different parts, is non-human parts potentially, do I still have those rights? I mean, that it's now toying onto that, borderline, a bit crazy science fiction, but we're coming into it slowly.
No, I agree. And the reason I advocate on this show for revamping of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is because the United Nations is an intergovernmental entity. It's not the world leader, but it would send a big advertising campaign or a big signal that something has to change. And a lot of nations are signatory to this organization, and it would send a ripple effect through all governments that something is happening. Something is happening. And it's interesting that you mention robot rights. Now, something in a little bit closer to people's hearts, quite technically in a way, and envisioned through something called Deus Ex, this game, is they invented this fictional piece here called the Augmented Rights Coalition, where basically I've got it here. It says the Augmented Rights Coalition, or ARC, is an international group of augmented activists who are fighting for the fair treatment of transhumans. Officially formed in July 2028. The ARC is a non-governmental organization but holds a considerable amount of political power in many countries due to the sheer number of people supporting the coalition. This power makes the ARC a threat to groups that wish to further restrict the rights of augmented people, because in the game Deus Ex, it's a different timeline of humanity, but essentially there was a big kerfuffle with a bunch of billionaires and millionaires and governments and everything, and one of them, to make a point, activated in a mischievous way the people, the augmented people, their prosthetic limbs, their hearts and stuff, to make them kind of go crazy, but they had no control over it, so they caused a lot of chaos, and it put the world on this division. The game is called Mankind Divided, the first one, where humans start to want to go their own way, and that's the natural flesh and blood ones, and the augmented people start to go another way. And the Augmented Rights Coalition essentially becomes the big voice of the augmented people who feel like they're being left out of mainstream society. And, the augmented rights people, they're very powerful. I mean, they're stronger, physically fit, they live a lot longer. But obviously the humans have all the power because they're so entrenched into the system. So the whole game is this big conversation about the rights of augmented people and the rights of humanity, or flesh and blood people, and it's interesting. Some of these people with flesh and blood, they hate the augmented people until they have to get an augmentation to survive. Maybe they have to have a heart transplant or something. So there's a lot of stories, of people crossing sides and very, very interesting stuff. But if you want to avoid all this chaos, we need to start thinking about it right now. We need to think about it right now. People with heart pacemakers in their heart, which is what you're saying. A lot of what the laws and the treaties and the conventions and all this sort of stuff, it's old, it's finished, it's toast, it's not relevant in today's world. We need to actually really start moving in this direction now before these big technology companies proliferate this technology a lot faster, because it's going to happen at scale, and it's going to happen cheaper, quicker, and people will adopt it because people value their own life. Maybe they don't value other people's life, but as we are definitely seeing with this COVID-19 thing, people will definitely vote or advocate in their own interests when push comes to shove. They won't virtue signal as much as they like to think that they do. You know what I mean?
Well, toilet paper is a classic example, right?
Fighting over toilet paper, but these are the same people who would say, oh, we would never do that. We would never do that. And then next minute they're fighting over toilet paper, right? Yeah. So this stuff is coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the more we open up people's eyes, imagination, it's like slowly unplugging people out of the matrix. Then the more we can have this dialogue. And I guess don't always leave it up to the governments or authorities to be led. I believe every single person should take it upon themselves to educate themselves, to learn a little bit more about what's going on and not rely on other people. If everyone just uplifted their game a little bit, then we will slowly move up together.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful point to leave on. I got a lot more to talk to you about, but we'll leave that for another show. I'll let you go. I know you're super busy, but I absolutely love. You're great. You're fantastic, and we have a lot more to talk about, because I think this is happening. This is real, and I agree with you. It's up to people at home to really consider what they want for the future, to consider their own lives, the lives and trajectory of any group that they want to really think about as well, anything outside of their own life, whether that be a family, community, local community, national community, or humanity as a whole, because we are bumping up and down on a ceiling on the UN Human Rights Convention. And we really need to start thinking about where our own self-directed evolution is taking us. And it's taking us in a mixed fashion. I mean, we're doing stuff with AI, we're doing stuff with robots, we're innovating on our own. We're doing our own biology stuff, and we've had plenty of biohackers on here to talk about. And you know some of them. Meow Meow, for example, the Australian one. He's a great guy. But plenty others. Tim Cannon and others. And so people are innovating. They're not gonna. It's not gonna stop. And if we don't have the conversations now, and people at home don't start to think about it now, then it could unfold into chaos, and that's not what we want. What we want is it unfolding into something in a post-scarcity framework that actually can really, really enhance the species as we go out into space, as we go into different places and dimensions, and as we eliminate lots of low-level labor from the workforce. This will be great for people, actually.
Absolutely. And I'll leave one book for everyone. Yuval Harari's Lessons of the 21st Century. If everyone can use this time wisely, read that one book. That's all I can recommend.
All right. Well, I'll leave the book link in the description. Penny Wong, it's fantastic to have you on the show. It's been really, really fun. And you've inspired me to go and read some more some of these authors, some more science fiction authors.
And science fiction authors too, yep. And next time, hopefully, I can show you some of the robots that I'm working with. Oh
yeah, hell yeah, yeah, that sounds really fun. I totally want to see that. Yeah, really, really cool stuff. They just launched the speaking of Explorer bots too. They're just about to launch a new sort of Curiosity rover. What's it called? Perseverance. Another one's going up to Mars, so we're going to get more footage from Mars too. So that's going to be exciting.
Amazing. We'll look forward to the next discussion. Keep safe, socially distance, and Spock.
Yep.
It's now socially acceptable to greet people. With,
all right, cool. Yeah. Yeah, they made it cool again.
That's it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning into this episode of Detonation. That's Penny Wong. Lots of fun. We'll see you again soon because we got so much to talk about. But and thanks to all the sponsors of the show. Thanks to everybody. And that's Detonation, where we're busy putting death out of business.